There are two ways a soul can die. The first is when your heart stops beating. The second is when your family decides you no longer exist. Mine was the second kind, and it was delivered not with a bang, but with a whisper on a piece of paper. It was the cruelest compliment ever written, a justification forged in the heart of betrayal, left on my pillow like a curse. You're the strongest one of us. You'll be okay. We won't. They weaponized my strength, twisting it into a blade to cut me out of their lives. They painted me as a martyr so they could escape as victims. If you have ever been made to feel like a ghost in your own home, if your trust has ever been shattered into a million pieces, then this story is for you. This is not just a tale of survival, it is a testament to the fire that burns in the ruins. It's about how I rebuilt a kingdom from the rubble they left me in. 12 years ago, I came home to a house that had its soul ripped out. The silence was a physical weight, pressing in on me, suffocating. There was no life here. No hum of the refrigerator, no drone of the TV, just a dead, hollow void. My parents' car, a fixture of my entire life, had vanished. The house felt like a crime scene, and I was the only one who didn't know what had happened. My own voice was a trespasser in the quiet. Mom? Dad? Leo? The silence that answered was mocking. It was an abyss. My blood ran cold as I stepped further inside. It wasn't just empty, it was sterile. My history had been amputated from the walls. The faint outlines where our family photos used to hang were like scars, pale and unforgiving. An entire childhood of captured moments, deemed unworthy, had been wiped clean. They didn't just pack boxes. They curated my oblivion. I flew up the stairs, a primal scream trapped in my throat. My bedroom door was open, and the sight beyond it broke something inside me. It was an exorcism. My closet, a gaping maw of empty hangers. My desk, wiped clean of every dream and doodle. The posters on my walls had been torn down, not just removed, leaving behind jagged wounds in the drywall. And in the corner, a black trash bag. It wasn't a bag of trash. It was a funeral pyre for the girl I used to be. My trembling hands tore it open to find the artifacts of my life. The first place science fair ribbon my dad had pretended to be proud of. The worn teddy bear I'd confided all my secrets to. The stack of letters from my best friend tied with a faded ribbon. Every piece of me, discarded. In the center of that desecrated room, one thing remained. My grandmother's locket. A silver heart, left glinting on the bare floorboards. A masterstroke of cruelty. Not an oversight, but a calculated wound. A reminder of the pure, unconditional love I once had, now left behind to mock me in the emptiness. It was their way of saying that even the best part of my past was now tainted, and it too was abandoning me. And then I saw it. The note. On my pillow, where my head was supposed to lay, was their final judgment. You're the strongest one of us. You'll be okay. We won't. It wasn't an explanation. It was an absolution. For them. They had anointed me, the strong one, so they could feel blameless in their cowardice. They had burdened me with a crown of thorns and called it a compliment. They were right, though. I was okay. But my survival became a quiet vow of vengeance, not against them, but against the ghosts they tried to make of me. 12 years later, when their shadows crept back into my life, they didn't find the girl they had sacrificed. They found a titan, forged in the very fires they had set. And they were about to learn that the thing about ghosts is they know exactly how to haunt you. The abandonment wasn't a sudden earthquake. It was the slow, grinding pressure of tectonic plates that had been shifting for years. Before they built a physical wall between us with state lines and highways, they had perfected the art of building invisible ones right inside our home. They were masters of a quiet kind of cruelty, the type that doesn't leave bruises but shatters you from the inside out. I see it now in flashes, these little cinematic moments of my own insignificance. There was the dinner table. It was supposed to be our sanctuary, the 1 hour a day we were a family. I was 14 and had just won the regional science fair. My project, a ridiculous but ambitious model of a self-sustaining ecosystem, had taken me months. I walked into the dining room that night, my heart a hummingbird in my chest, the blue ribbon clutched in my hand. The air was thick with the usual silence, punctuated only by the scrape of forks on ceramic plates. My father was a fortress behind his newspaper. My mother was pushing peas around her plate, her mind a million miles away. My brother Leo was shoveling food into his mouth, oblivious. "I won," I said, my voice too loud in the quiet. My mother glanced up, a flicker of something, annoyance, surprise, in her eyes before it was gone. "Oh, that's nice, dear." She turned to my brother. "Leo, did you remember to take out the trash?" "Yeah, Mom," he mumbled through a mouthful of mashed potatoes. My father rustled his paper, a sign he was listening but not engaging. "What's the prize money?" he asked, his voice muffled. "It's not about the money, Dad. It's—" I trailed off, the excitement in my chest deflated, collapsing into a familiar heavy ache. "It's an honor. The judges said my methodology was—" "That's great, honey," my mom cut in, her tone final. "Just make sure your little hobby doesn't get in the way of your chores." She picked up her plate and carried it to the sink. The conversation was over. The blue ribbon in my hand felt cheap and stupid. I had become invisible again, my triumph a ghost at the dinner table. They didn't see me. They saw a daughter-shaped outline that was supposed to be quiet and useful. And I was useful. 2 years later, my mother came down with a nasty flu, the kind that chains you to the bed. My dad was too busy at work, and Leo was too young to handle it. So I stepped up. I worked my after-school job and used every penny of my savings, money I'd been hoarding for a used car, to buy her medicine, soup, and ginger ale. For a week, I was her nurse. I checked her temperature, brought her meals, and sat by her bed reading until she fell asleep. On the 7th day, she was finally feeling better, sitting up in bed. I walked in with a tray. She smiled weakly. "Thank you, Clara. I don't know what we would have done without you." For a moment, a fragile warmth bloomed in my chest. Maybe this time they'd see. Just then, Leo walked past the open door and sneezed. A single, dramatic sneeze. My mother's attention snapped to him instantly. Her face, which had been pale and tired, was suddenly flooded with maternal panic. "Leo, baby, are you getting sick? Oh, you sound terrible. Come here, let me feel your forehead. Clara, run to the store and get him the good cough syrup, the cherry-flavored kind he likes." I stood there, holding the tray, the warmth in my chest turning to ice. I had just spent my entire savings and a week of my life caring for her. Leo sneezed, and the world tilted back to its natural axis, with him at the center and me in the distant, forgotten orbit. But his casual cruelty was the sharpest cut of all. He was weaker than them, more impressionable, and he learned their lessons well. He learned that my strength was a resource to be mined. The year before they left, we were in the same advanced history class. We had a massive term paper due, worth half our grade. I had been researching for weeks, meticulously crafting an argument about the economic catalysts of the French Revolution. I was proud of it. One evening, I came home to find him at the kitchen table looking panicked. "I'm totally screwed, Clara," he whined. "I have nothing. Mr. Davison is going to fail me." My heart stupidly went out to him. "Okay, let's brainstorm," I said. I spent 2 hours outlining my entire thesis for him, suggesting sources, helping him structure his thoughts. A week later, he presented his paper in class. It was my paper, my thesis, my arguments, even some of my phrases, just slightly reworded. He got an A+. The teacher praised his original and insightful analysis. He stood at the front of the class, soaking in the applause, and he didn't even glance at me. That night, I confronted him, my voice shaking with a rage I rarely allowed myself to feel. "That was my work, Leo." He just shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. "Chill out. You always have good ideas anyway. I just borrowed one. Besides, you probably got an A too, right? So what's the big deal?" That was the moment I understood. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a utility. A well of strength and ideas they could draw from whenever they were empty. My love, my effort, my very thoughts were not gifts to be cherished, but resources to be consumed. They weren't just neglecting me, they were devouring me. And eventually, they decided there was nothing left to take. In those first weeks, pain was not an emotion. It was a physical state of being. It was the biting cold of the concrete floor in the storage unit I rented with my last few dollars. A metal coffin where I'd curl up inside a too-thin jacket. It was the gnawing, persistent hunger I tried to quiet with spoonfuls of cheap peanut butter, its saltiness mixing with the bitter taste of despair. It was the harsh, chemical smell of the YMCA showers, where I would sneak in at dawn to wash away the grime of homelessness, if only for 10 minutes under the hot water. I became a phantom, moving through the edges of society. By day, I took refuge in the anonymous warmth of the public library, not to read novels, but to devour the knowledge that might save me. I sat in front of aging, flickering computer screens and taught myself to code, one line at a time. The internet became my university, and survival was my tuition. Every line of code I wrote was a single brick, building a fragile wall between me and the abyss. At night, I put on a different persona. I was the waitress in a 24-hour diner where the air was thick with the smell of grease and burnt coffee. I moved in a ceaseless ballet of taking orders, refilling mugs, and clearing away the remnants of other people's lives. I learned to smile while I was breaking, to nod at customer complaints while my soul was screaming. After my shift, at 3 a.m, I didn't go home. I walked the empty streets to a downtown office building where I had a second job, an invisible cleaner. In the silence of those empty offices, I polished the lives of others. I vacuumed the carpets where executives walked, emptied the trash cans filled with discarded ideas, and wiped down the board tables where million-dollar deals were made. I was surrounded by success, yet separated from it by an impenetrable pane of glass. It was in that silence, surrounded by the smell of cleaning chemicals and the cold fluorescent lights, that I plotted my escape. The turning point didn't arrive like a bolt of lightning. It came in the form of a woman named Eleanor Vance. She was the CEO of the tech firm whose offices I cleaned. She was older, with impeccably styled silver hair and eyes that saw more than most. Unlike everyone else, she saw me. One night, she was working late and found me not just cleaning her desk, but reading a book on data structures I had rescued from a recycling bin. She didn't say much, but the next day, an offer was left for me with my supervisor. It wasn't charity, it was a chance. A paid internship in the IT department. She had seen something in me that I had almost forgotten myself, an ember that hadn't been extinguished. She saw the fight in my exhausted eyes. That job was my lifeline. I clung to it with a savage determination. I was the first to arrive and the last to leave. I took on the tasks no one else wanted, untangling the most complex code, and I studied with the ferocious hunger of a starving person. I had spent years living in the shadows, and now I craved the light of knowledge. Eleanor became my mentor, a tough but fair teacher who taught me that in the world of tech, your value wasn't where you came from, but what you could build. My ascent was fast. From intern, I became a full-time developer, then a project lead. But I was never satisfied. There was a deeper drive, a need not just to succeed, but to create something meaningful from the wreckage of my past. The year I turned 25, I quit my job and founded my own company. I called it Aegis Digital. Aegis, the mythological shield of the gods, a symbol of impenetrable protection. The name wasn't random. My firm would specialize in cybersecurity, in protecting the most valuable commodity in the digital world: identity. My family had tried to erase my identity. They had reduced me to a blank space, an empty room in their story. So I built an empire dedicated to protecting the identities of others. I created firewalls and complex encryption algorithms to ensure that no one could be wiped away like I had been. Every product my company shipped was an act of defiance against my past, a declaration that I not only existed, but that I was now a guardian. I had turned my greatest pain into my greatest weapon, my trauma into my mission. Aegis Digital wasn't just a business. It was the shield I never had. It was the fortress I built for myself, not with brick and mortar, but with resilience, intellect, and an unbreakable will. I had become a millionaire, but the real wealth wasn't in my bank account. It was in knowing that I had reclaimed control of my own story, and I would never let anyone else write it again. For years, the past was a locked room in my mind. I knew it was there, but I had learned not to go near the door. My company was my fortress, my work was my armor, and success was the highest wall I had built. But I had forgotten a fundamental truth about ghosts. They don't need doors. They walk through walls. The trigger wasn't a knock, it was an article. Forbes magazine had featured me in their 30 under 30 list. There was a photo of me, taken in my office, the city skyline gleaming behind me. I looked powerful, poised, an icon of self-made success. The article told a sanitized version of my story, speaking of overcoming adversity and resilience, without getting into the messy details. I thought it was a victory. It turned out to be a lighthouse, and it guided the ghost ships back to shore. The first contact came quietly, a LinkedIn notification. Leo. His name flashed on my phone screen, and for a second I couldn't breathe. My heart, a well-tuned machine, faltered. His profile looked so ordinary, so foreign. A project manager at a small construction firm. His photo showed a man who looked more tired than his years. The message was brief and professional, a velvet-wrapped knife. Congrats on the success, Clara. Long time no see. Hope you're well. It wasn't an apology, it was a probe. A finger dipped in the water to test the temperature. I stared at that message for hours, a cold fury rising in my blood. 12 years of graveyard silence, and this is how he breaks it? With a polite platitude like we were old colleagues? I didn't respond. I deleted the request. I tried to dismiss it as a gnat, a passing annoyance. But 2 days later, the second bomb dropped. This time it was an email, directly to my corporate inbox. From my mother. Seeing her name on my screen was like seeing a specter step out of an old photograph. The email was a masterpiece of manipulation, every word carefully crafted to gnaw at the guilt I thought I'd long since excised. She didn't mention the article. She began by talking about my father's health. He wasn't well. His blood pressure was high. His heart was weak. And the doctor, she said, attributed it to stress. A specific, lingering kind of stress. The kind that comes from wondering every single day for 12 years where your youngest child is, if she's safe, if she hates you. She wrote of sleepless nights, of how regret was a cancer that eats the soul. She said all they wanted was to hear my voice, to know I was okay. The email ended with a devastating question. Can you grant a dying, regretful old man that one gift? It was perfect. It was venomous. It didn't ask for forgiveness, which she knew I wouldn't give. It asked for pity. It cast them as victims of their own regret, and my silence as an act of cruelty. I read that email over and over, and with each reading, the walls of my fortress trembled. The rational part of me, the cold CEO, recognized it for what it was. A calculated performance. But the 17-year-old girl inside me, the one still trapped in that empty room, began to cry. That evening, I did what I always do when the walls start to close in. I called Dr. Anya Sharma, my therapist. She'd been with me for the last 5 years, a calm guide through the jungle of my past. I read both messages to her, my voice artificially steady. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said in her gentle but firm voice, "They aren't looking for Clara. They are looking for Aegis Digital. A sick father may or may not be real, but their timing is undeniable. They waited until you were publicly, verifiably successful, Clara. They waited until you had something they could possibly want." Her words were a splash of cold water, dousing the emotional fire that had started to flare. She was right. This wasn't about family, it was about strategy. And if this was a battle, I wasn't going to fight with my heart, I was going to fight with my head. I made a decision. I would respond. Not to my mother. I would respond to Leo. I would open a small crack in my armor, not for hope, but for intelligence gathering. I needed to know what they wanted. I needed to see the game board. I wrote a short, cold email agreeing to meet for a coffee. I offered no explanation. I offered no warmth. I offered only a time and a place. I was choosing the battlefield. A rooftop bar at a downtown hotel. My territory. A place high above the ground where the ghosts couldn't easily reach me, or so I told myself. The rooftop bar was cold and impersonal, all chrome and glass. It was designed to impress, not to welcome. That's why I chose it. There were no warm corners for shared confessions, only hard surfaces and a commanding view of the city I had conquered. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table in the corner, my back to the wall, a defensive position. I ordered a sparkling water. I needed a clear head for this. Leo arrived on time, but he looked out of place. He wore an ill-fitting suit that looked like it had seen too many stressful meetings. His face had our family's features, but they were pulled down by a weight I didn't recognize. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hair was starting to thin at the temples. He looked older than his years, worn down by life in a way that was different from me. I had been sharpened to a blade. He seemed to have been blunted by it. The awkwardness between us was a tangible thing. He sat, avoiding my eyes, and commented on the view. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to be the one to break it. He finally did. He started with an apology. It was a weak, vague apology for the way things happened. He said he was just a kid, that he was scared, that he didn't know what to do. He painted a portrait of himself as a helpless bystander to our parents' decision. I listened, my face a stone mask. I didn't interrupt. I let him talk, watching every tick, every shift in his voice. I wasn't listening to his words. I was scanning for data. And then he deployed the lie. It was expertly wrapped inside a confession. He admitted they left, that it was a terrible mistake. But then he leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. He said that our parents had told him they'd left money for me. A trust account, he called it. Enough to get me through to my 18th birthday. Enough to get me started. He said he had always believed I had gotten it, that I was okay. My silence over the years, he claimed, was proof that I had wanted to cut ties, not that I was struggling. There it was, the gambit, a perfectly engineered lie. It simultaneously absolved him of the guilt of not looking for me and painted me as cold and unforgiving. It placed the blame for our estrangement on me, and it told me exactly what I was dealing with. This wasn't a clumsy reunion. It was a negotiation. I didn't react. I didn't even blink. Inside, a steel door slammed shut. The 17-year-old was locked away. The CEO was at the table. I simply said, "There was no trust account, Leo." I stated it as a fact, not an accusation. Panic flickered across his face before he masked it with confusion. He shook his head, feigning disbelief. He said our parents had lied to him too. He made himself another victim right before my eyes. And then, having planted the seed of sympathy, he began to plant the seed of need. He didn't ask for money directly. He was smoother than that. He told me a story of how the family construction business had failed in the recession, of our parents' mounting debts, of how he was trying to carry them. And then, the finale. He spoke of his wife, Sophia. She needed surgery, he said, his voice cracking on cue. Nothing life-threatening, but expensive. Insurance wouldn't cover all of it. He looked out the window at my city and sighed. He said he just didn't know what to do, that he wished he had a fraction of my business sense. It was a masterful performance. He presented a problem without asking for a solution, hoping my instincts, or perhaps some residual guilt, would lead me to offer one. He wanted me to be the savior, to step in and fix their messes, both emotional and financial. I let the silence hang between us again. I looked him straight in the eye, and for the first time, he held my gaze. He was looking for something. Forgiveness, money, absolution. I gave him none of it. I took a sip of water and set the glass down with a definitive click. I said I was sorry to hear about his troubles. My voice was cool and polite, the voice I used with business associates. Then I stood up. I said I had another meeting. The desperation in his eyes as I turned to leave was almost palpable. He had failed. His probe had come up empty. As I walked out of the bar and into the bright sunlight, I didn't feel relief, nor did I feel anger. I felt a cold clarity. The game had begun. And now I knew exactly what the enemy wanted. They didn't just want a reunion. They wanted a bailout. And I knew that with my family, a bailout always came at a price. The cold clarity I felt after leaving Leo quickly curdled into a kind of dread. I hadn't won a battle. I had merely survived the first volley. I had shown them my walls, and now I could only wait for the siege to begin. It started not with a cannonball, but with a ghost from my childhood delivered in a plain cardboard box. My assistant brought it to my office, her face a mask of professional curiosity. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a porcelain doll I hadn't seen in 15 years. Its painted blue eyes stared up at me, its smile a fixed porcelain lie. It was the doll I had loved more than anything, the one I had cried over for a week when its arm broke, the one I had to leave behind. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a message loud and clear. We know where you are. We remember what you loved. We can reach you anywhere. I felt a profound sense of violation, as if a dirty hand had reached through time and touched the purest part of my memory. I dropped the doll back in the box as if it were radioactive and told my assistant to throw it away. A week later, another package arrived. This time, it was a tin of homemade cookies, my mother's specific recipe, an oatmeal raisin I would have recognized anywhere. The smell, once a source of comfort, now felt like a poison seeping into the sterile air of my office. This was their strategy. A psychological invasion. They were using the artifacts of my childhood as weapons, trying to dismantle the fortress I had built by reminding me of the defenseless girl who used to live inside it. When the psychological approach didn't work, they escalated. They attacked the fortress itself. The call came from a panicked board member, a man I respected deeply. His voice was laced with a discomfort I had never heard from him before. He spoke of a phone call he had received from my father. A deeply concerned father, he said, who just wanted to make sure his estranged daughter was okay and was not being taken advantage of. My father had painted a picture of me as a brilliant but fragile workaholic, isolated and alone, a narrative designed to plant seeds of doubt about my stability, my judgment. The fury that filled me was so cold it felt like ice water flooding my veins. They had dared to breach these walls. They had tried to turn my own success against me, to poison the very ground I stood on. I spent the rest of the day in damage control, my voice a calm, professional instrument on the phone as I reassured my investors and partners, while inside, a storm of pure rage was breaking. I had built Aegis Digital to be impenetrable, but I had never anticipated an attack from the ghosts who shared my DNA. But their final gambit was the most depraved of all. It came 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon. A call from a blocked number. I almost ignored it, but some dark premonition made me answer. The voice on the other end was a woman's, calm and clinical. She identified herself as a nurse from St. Jude's Hospital. She said my mother, Catherine, had been admitted with a massive heart attack. She was in critical condition. For one terrifying moment, the CEO vanished. The fortress crumbled. All that was left was the 17-year-old girl standing in an empty room. A raw, guttural sound escaped my throat. My vision blurred. The carefully constructed world I had built dissolved into a single, blinding point of panic. My mother, dying. The nurse continued, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy, saying my mother had been asking for me, that the stress of our estrangement had likely contributed to her condition. It was a perfectly aimed dagger, straight to the heart of any residual guilt I might have carried. But as she spoke, something cold and sharp cut through my grief. A detail. St. Jude's Hospital was a renowned children's cancer research center. They didn't have a cardiac ward for adults. The CEO was back. The fortress walls slammed back into place, forged even stronger in the fires of this new betrayal. While the nurse kept me on the line, my fingers flew across my second keyboard, my hands moving with a speed born of pure adrenaline. I initiated a trace. The call was coming from a VoIP number, routed through 3 different servers to mask its origin. But they didn't know who I was. They didn't know what my company did. This wasn't just my business, it was my hunting ground. Within 90 seconds, I had it. The call wasn't from a hospital. It was being bounced from a burner phone. A burner phone whose signal was currently pinging from a cell tower in a small town 2 states away. The same small town my parents lived in. I didn't say anything. I just hung up. I sat in my chair, the silence of my office roaring in my ears. The panic was gone, replaced by something terrifying in its stillness. It was the calm of a general who has just realized the true nature of the war she is fighting. They had not just tried to manipulate me. They had not just lied. They had weaponized the very idea of a child's love for her mother. They had been willing to fake a death to get what they wanted. And I knew then, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that these people were capable of anything. The next move in the game didn't come from them. It came from an angle I never could have predicted. An email appeared in my inbox, not from a personal account, but from a law firm. The subject line was simple: regarding a private family matter. My heart seized, preparing for a lawsuit, a new form of harassment. But the email was from a lawyer representing a Mrs. Sophia Rossi, Leo's wife. She was requesting a private in-person meeting. A new player had just stepped onto the board. I didn't know if she was a pawn or a queen, but I knew I had to see her. We met in a neutral location, a quiet conference room my lawyer Ben had booked for us. The woman who walked in was not what I expected. Sophia was composed, with intelligent, weary eyes. She carried an air of quiet determination. This was not the wife of a victim. This was a woman who had come to fight her own battle. She got straight to the point. "This isn't just about your past, Clara," she said, her voice steady. "This is about my children's future. I will not have my daughters grow up in the web of lies and poison your parents have spun. I'm here because I believe you and I are on the same side." She slid a thick manila folder across the polished table. "I think you need to see the truth," she said. "The whole truth." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. It was a meticulously organized portfolio of my family's deceit. The first section was a collection of emails, printed in chronological order. Emails from my parents to aunts, uncles, and old family friends, all sent in the years following my abandonment. They were filled with theatrical grief, lamenting their troubled runaway daughter. They wrote about how they'd spent years searching for me, about their sleepless nights, about the hole in their family. They had not just erased me. They had replaced me with a fictional character in a tragedy where they were the heroic, suffering parents. The next section was financial records. Bank statements from the very years they claimed they were in financial ruin, the years they used as an excuse for leaving me. But the statements didn't show hardship. They showed cruises, a new car, expensive dinners. They had abandoned me not because they were struggling, but so they could live more comfortably. I felt sick. But the final document in the folder was the one that stopped my heart. It was a life insurance policy, taken out on me when I was 16 years old, for $250,000. And it had been cashed in the month after my 18th birthday. The air left my lungs. This was a different level of evil. This wasn't just neglect. This wasn't just abandonment. This was predatory. They had placed a bet on my life, and when I survived, they had cashed in on my legal adulthood as their final payout. I was not just an unwanted daughter. I had been an investment, a commodity. I looked up at Sophia, my face pale. She just nodded, her eyes filled with a sad understanding. "There's more," she said softly. "You need to understand Leo." She explained that he wasn't the mastermind. He was their first victim. She told me stories of their psychological control over him, of how they had systematically broken his confidence his entire life, making him utterly dependent on their approval. He was weak, and they had exploited that weakness, convincing him that their version of events was the truth, that my silence was proof of my own selfish choices. "He lied to you about the trust fund because they lied to him," she said. "He's terrified of them, but being afraid doesn't excuse what he did. His silence was his complicity." I sat there, the contents of the folder spread before me like the wreckage of a plane crash. The war I thought I was fighting had just become infinitely darker. My parents weren't just greedy and manipulative. They were monstrous. Sophia had handed me the ammunition I needed, but she had also revealed that the enemy I was facing was more ruthless than I could have ever imagined. A fragile alliance had been formed in that sterile conference room, but the truth it had uncovered was terrifying, and I knew with absolute certainty that this was far from over. The revelation of my parents' true nature left a crater in my life. The alliance with Sophia was a fragile lifeline in a sea of darkness. I knew they would retaliate. I just didn't know how deep their depravity ran. The attack, when it came, wasn't against me. It was a precision strike aimed at the weakest link in our new chain, Leo. Sophia called me, her voice tight with a barely controlled panic. It wasn't a physical attack. It was something far more insidious. My father, who had remained a co-signer on Leo Ari's primary bank account since his college days, a supposed gesture of parental support, had exercised his power. He had drained the account. Every last cent. The money for their mortgage, their car payments, Sophia's upcoming surgery, their daughter's preschool tuition, all of it. Gone. They had been financially obliterated in a single silent digital transaction. The withdrawal was followed by a single chilling text message to Leo from our father. See what happens when you choose the wrong side? Without us, you are nothing. It was a kill shot, designed not just to ruin them, but to shatter Leo's spirit completely. And it worked. When I arrived at their small suburban house, I found my brother broken in a way I'd never seen. He was sitting on the living room floor amidst his daughter's toys, his head in his hands, making a choked, guttural sound that wasn't quite crying. It was the sound of a man whose entire reality had been ripped apart. The parents he had spent his life trying to please, the parents whose approval he had craved more than air, had just proven they were willing to destroy him without a second thought. He was their asset, and he had just been liquidated. Sophia was the one holding them together, her face pale but her jaw set with a warrior's resolve. She was trying to comfort their confused daughter while simultaneously trying to pull her husband back from the brink. In that moment, watching them, the last vestiges of my old resentment toward Leo burned away, replaced by a fierce, protective instinct I didn't know I possessed. They were not just my brother and his wife. They were victims, caught in the same toxic web that had ensnared me. And I had the one thing my parents could no longer touch: power. "Pack your bags," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "All of you. You're coming with me." My penthouse, once a symbol of my solitary success, became a sanctuary. A war room. I moved Leo, Sophia, and their daughter, Lily, into my guest wing. The first night was a blur of logistics and raw emotion. I had my lawyer, Ben Carter, on a conference call, initiating legal proceedings to freeze what was left of my parents' assets and documenting the theft. I had my head of security sweep their phones and laptops for tracking software. I became the protector I never had, the parent they never were. I was a general, marshaling my forces. But in the quiet moments, a strange and fragile new reality began to take shape. I watched as 3-year-old Lily, innocent of the storm raging around her, discovered the wonders of my smart home, asking the AI to play Baby Shark on a loop until Sophia gently intervened. I found myself in the kitchen late one night with Sophia, sharing a bottle of wine in silence, a silent acknowledgement of the bizarre, terrifying bond that now connected us. The most difficult moments were with Leo. He was a ghost, haunted by a lifetime of manipulation. He would apologize to me over and over, his voice thick with shame, for his weakness, for his blindness. One night, I found him staring out at the city lights from my balcony. "I always believed them," he whispered, his back to me. "I thought you were the one who was cold. I thought you were the one who left us. It was easier to believe that than to believe they were monsters." "They needed you to believe it," I said, stepping up beside him. "It's not your fault they programmed you." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of an understanding. In the sterile, modern luxury of my apartment, we began awkwardly and haltingly to act like a family. I, who had eaten alone for over a decade, found myself at a dinner table filled with the chaotic energy of a toddler. Leo, who had lived his life under our parents' shadow, began to look at me with a dawning respect. And Sophia, the unlikely catalyst, became the quiet heart of our fractured unit. We were not a family bound by blood and shared memories, but a new kind of family, forged in trauma and united against a common enemy. And for the first time in 12 years, I wasn't just surviving. I was defending something. I had a home to protect. The courtroom was a sterile, wood-paneled box, utterly devoid of emotion. It felt like an inadequate venue for the kind of visceral, life-altering battle we were about to fight. My parents were already there, sitting on the opposite side of the aisle. They looked smaller in person, stripped of the monstrous power they held in my mind. They had hired a lawyer, a slick reptilian man in an expensive suit, who was already trying to charm the bailiff. The hearing for the emergency restraining order began, and their strategy became brutally clear. Their lawyer painted me as a vindictive, mentally unstable pariah. He spoke of a troubled childhood, hinting at behavioral issues. He framed my success as a sign of a ruthless, obsessive personality. He twisted the narrative until I was the aggressor, a cold-hearted daughter using her fortune to torment her loving elderly parents who only wanted to reconnect. It was a masterful performance of character assassination. I sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, and forced myself to remain still, to keep my face a blank mask. Ben, my lawyer, had prepared me for this. "Let him talk," he had whispered. "He's handing us the rope." When it was our turn, Ben didn't rise with fire and fury. He rose with cold, hard facts. He began by calmly dismantling their narrative, not with accusations, but with evidence. He presented the emails, the financial records Sophia had provided. He detailed the pattern of harassment, from the doll to the targeted calls to my business partners. With each piece of evidence, I could see a subtle shift in the judge's expression, from professional detachment to a focused intensity. The climax was twofold. First, Ben presented the forensic analysis of the nurse phone call, tracing the burner phone directly to a cell tower less than a mile from my parents' home. A hushed murmur went through the small courtroom. My father's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled him with a sharp rap of his gavel. The final, devastating blow was the life insurance policy. Ben placed the document on the projector, the stark black and white print illuminating the room. He pointed to the issue date when I was 16, and then to the payout date just 1 month after my 18th birthday, the earliest they could legally cash it in. "This was never about a lost daughter," Ben said, his voice ringing with quiet authority. "This was about a lost asset. When Clara proved to be more valuable alive and successful than she was as a policy, they came back to collect." The silence in the room was absolute. My parents' lawyer was speechless. My father's face was a mottled shade of red. My mother's was ashen. They had been exposed, their ugliest secrets laid bare under the unforgiving fluorescent lights of the law. The judge, a woman with graying hair and eyes that had clearly seen the worst of humanity, took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked at my parents, and for the first time, I saw not just a judge, but a person filled with a profound and weary disgust. When she spoke, her voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a shard of glass. She didn't just grant the restraining order. She delivered a verbal condemnation that was more powerful than any legal document. "In my 15 years on this bench," she said, her eyes locked on my parents, "I have rarely seen such a calculated and cruel campaign of psychological and emotional abuse. You did not just abandon a child. You attempted to erase her, and when that failed, you sought to exploit her. Your actions are not just contemptible, they are an affront to the very concept of family." She granted us a permanent restraining order. 500 yards, no contact of any kind, direct or indirect. Any violation would result in immediate arrest. It was a total, unequivocal victory. As we walked out of the courtroom, dazed and numb, Leo stopped me in the hallway. The look on his face was one I had never seen before, a mixture of awe, shame, and a profound, shattering relief. "I'm so sorry, Clara," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry for all the years I didn't see, for all the times I chose their side because it was easier. You didn't just save me, you saved my family." He pulled me into a hug, and this time it wasn't awkward or hesitant. It was the hug of a brother, 12 years too late, but finally real. As I stood there in the cold, sterile hallway of the courthouse, I felt a single, unfamiliar tear trace a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. A wall inside me that I didn't even know was still standing had finally, definitively, come crashing down. The victory in court felt like the end of a war. For a few fragile days, there was peace. We started to breathe again. Leo and Sophia began looking for a new house, a new start. Lily's laughter filled my once silent apartment. It was a glimpse of a future I had never allowed myself to imagine. We had won. We had the law on our side, a piece of paper that was supposed to be our shield. But we had underestimated the depravity of an enemy that had nothing left to lose. The peace was shattered by a simple text message. It came to my phone from an unknown number. There were no words at first, just a picture. It was a photo of Lily, taken from a distance through a long lens. She was on the swings at a park near my building, her head thrown back in a moment of pure, innocent joy. She was beautiful, and she was being watched. A moment later, a line of text appeared beneath the photo. "A piece of paper can't protect everyone." The air turned to ice in my lungs. This wasn't a threat of violence, it was something far more sinister. It was a violation of the most sacred space imaginable. They were reminding me that even if they couldn't touch me, they could still cast their shadow over the people I had come to love. They were turning my greatest strength, my new family, into my greatest vulnerability. Sophia saw the photo over my shoulder and made a sound I will never forget. A raw, guttural noise of a mother animal whose child is in danger. She snatched Lily into her arms, holding her as if she could physically absorb the threat. Leo's face, which had just started to lose its haunted look, contorted into a mask of pure rage and terrifying impotence. The piece of paper from the court, our great victory, suddenly felt as flimsy and useless as a single sheet of paper in a hurricane. They had found a way to continue the terror from 501 yards away. The law had reached its limit. This was no longer a legal battle. It was a battle for the soul, and I knew a restraining order couldn't win it for us. That night, after a frantic call to the police that resulted in a vague promise to increase patrols, I found myself on the phone with Dr. Sharma. I told her everything, my voice a low, steady monotone that didn't betray the inferno of rage and fear inside me. She listened patiently until I was done. Then she asked the question that changed everything. "You've spent this whole time reacting to them, Clara," she said gently. "You've been defending against their moves. But I want you to stop for a moment and answer this. What do you truly want? Not what you want them to stop doing. What is the ultimate victory for you?" I thought about it. I didn't want an apology. I didn't want them to feel remorse. I didn't even want justice anymore. Not in the traditional sense. The word that came to my mind was simple and absolute. "Severance," I said. "I want to be completely and irrevocably free of them. I want to cut the chain, not just legally, but psychically, so that their ghosts can never touch us again." "Then you know what you have to do," she replied. "This can't be won in a courtroom. It has to be won on your terms. You have to be the one to end it." A terrifying calm settled over me. She was right. I had been hiding behind lawyers and court orders, fighting their war by their rules. It was time to fight it by mine. I could not spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next anonymous text, the next shadow in the distance. I had to go to the source of the poison. I had to face the monsters one last time. I didn't tell Leo or Sophia. This was a burden I had to carry alone. I sent a single, untraceable email to my father's account. "One last meeting, you and Mom, no one else. You will hear what I have to say and then it will be over forever. I will tell you when and where." The reply came in under a minute. "We'll be there." I had just summoned the demons from the abyss, but this time I would not be the frightened child. I would be the exorcist. I chose the location with surgical precision. It was the abandoned site of my father's failed construction company on the industrial outskirts of the city. A graveyard of his ambition and integrity. Weeds grew through cracked concrete foundations. Skeletons of half-finished buildings reached for the sky like rusted fingers. It was a monument to their ruin, and it was the perfect place to bury our past. I arrived first, the wind whipping my coat around me. I stood in the center of the desolation, a lone figure in a wasteland of their making. They arrived minutes later, their car looking out of place and garish against the decay. They got out looking older, smaller, diminished by the scale of their own failure that surrounded them. They expected tears or screams. They expected a final emotional plea from the daughter they had broken. I gave them nothing but cold, quiet control. "There will be no discussion," I began, my voice clear and steady against the wind. "There will be no negotiation. You will listen, and then you will disappear from our lives." My mother started to speak, her voice trembling with manufactured pity. "Clara, we just want—" "I know what you want." I cut her off, my gaze like ice. "You want a lifeline. You want to drain us, to feed off our lives because you have failed so profoundly at your own. But that is over." I held up a folder, a different one from Sophia's. My company, Aegis Digital, I said, letting the name hang in the air, is very, very good at finding things people try to hide. After you stole Leo's money, I had my forensic accounting team take a look at your bankruptcy filings. I saw a flicker of genuine fear in my father's eyes for the first time. They found a pattern, I continued, of hidden assets, of fraudulent reporting, of significant prosecutable tax evasion. It's all here. Every illegal transfer, every lie you told the government. I let the weight of my words sink in. This was a language they understood. Not emotion, not morality, but consequences. This is my one and only offer, I said. You will vanish. You will never contact me, Leo, Sophia, or my niece ever again. You will not call, you will not write, you will not send gifts, you will not watch us from a distance. You will become ghosts. If I so much as sense your shadow in my life again, this entire file goes to the Internal Revenue Service and the District Attorney's Office. I will not just take your freedom, I will take every last cent you have hidden away. It was not a threat of social shame. It was a promise of total annihilation, delivered in the calm, measured tone of a CEO closing a final deal. Then I reached into my pocket and took out the locket. It felt warm in my hand. I walked forward and placed it on a rusted, overturned barrel that sat between us. This is the last piece of the past you have any claim to, I said. The last chain. It's yours now. I don't need it anymore. I turned and walked away. I did not run. I did not look back. With every step, I felt a weight I had carried for 12 years begin to lift. I felt the invisible chains turn to dust. The silence from them was absolute. 6 months later. The sun is warm on my face. The air is filled with the smell of barbecue and the sound of children's laughter. We're in the backyard of Leo and Sophia's new house, a small but bright home 20 minutes from my apartment. Lily is running through the sprinkler, her shrieks of joy a kind of music. Sophia is setting the table. Leo is at the grill, and for the first time, he looks truly peaceful. He walks over to me, handing me a cold drink. Happy anniversary, he says softly. Anniversary of what? I ask. Of us, he says. Of this. He gestures to the chaotic, beautiful scene around us. Then he hands me a small velvet-wrapped box. Inside is the locket, but it's been transformed. The dull, tarnished silver is gone, polished to a brilliant, dazzling shine. It catches the sunlight, throwing tiny rainbows on the grass. It belongs with you, he says. Not as a memory of what was, but as a symbol of what we built. I let him fasten it around my neck. It's not cold this time. It's warm from the sun. It is not a scar. It is a medal, a symbol of a war that was won and of a family that was not inherited, but chosen. I look at the life around me, at the laughter, at the love, and I finally understand. They didn't call me the strongest one. They just revealed the strength that was in me all along. And with it, I had built my own home.